I prefer Agatha Christie's outlook better. You all remember Agatha Christie, the great mystery writer. You see, she was married to one of the preeminent archaeologists of her time. And once when she was asked what it's like to be married to an archaeologist, she replied, "Oh, it's wonderful. The older I get, the more interested in me he becomes." She was clever enough to see her age as an asset rather than a liability. And we need to be clever enough to recognize that New York City, with its 47,000 abandoned lots, has an amazing asset just waiting to be deployed. And this brings up a central point. To the moon for a week. It's too big a leap. We need to bring nature to these kids in a way that makes sense to them. And then later, after they have developed a connection, a love for nature, then we can make our way to Yellowstone, and it will be meaningful. By the year 2050, 85% of all Americans will live in big cities. And for the first time in history, we will be a majority-minority country. If we are to make nature relevant to these Americans, then we must recognize the value not only of our national forests and wildlife refuges, but also of our neighborhood parks, our wooded cul-de-sacs, and even the abandoned lots that have yet to be restored. For too long, we in the environmental movement have defined nature in terms of wildness. Order indeed. Consider this. There are 20 million diabetics in this country today. There will be 40 million in 2015. And if we don't change course, 80 million people with diabetes by the year 2050. Already we spend over $2 trillion each year on health care in this country, with 95% of that spent on direct medical services and only 5% allocated to preventing disease and promoting health and a healthy lifestyle. The implications for the country are beyond severe, from a health perspective to the impact on local, state, and national budgets, to corporate competitiveness, to the future of our magnificent land and water legacy. We need to rethink our approach to wellness and health. Nature as the first prescription rather than the last, and forests as an essential part of that. For example, we know that patients in rooms with tree views have shorter hospitalizations, and that children with ADHD who have access to natural areas are calmer and require less medication. And we know that the presence of trees outside apartment buildings and a public housing project in inner city Chicago predict better coping skills, less crime, and less violence. And finally, we know that among children who play in paved-over playgrounds, the leaders tend to be the most physically mature, while among children who play on green playgrounds, the leaders tend to be the most creative. Remember, these are the future leaders of our country. With all the complexity in the world today, from global warming to free trade and immigration to ethnic and religious intolerance, do we really believe that we can lead based on strength alone? All Americans care about these issues. They may come to the table for different reasons, but believe me, they want a seat at the table, and we need to set a place for them. Poor people, people of color, people with disabilities, and others who have the least access to natural settings and who may need it the most. As a nation, we will be paid back many times over. My favorite lapel button says simply, "The meek are getting ready." Now, I'm not sure if the meek will inherit the earth, but I am sure that our young people will, and we need to help them get ready. As I travel across all 50 states, too often I witness a culture of confrontation rather than collaboration. Too often I'm reminded of John Gardner's phrase, "the war of the parts against the whole." The war of the parts against the whole. Over fears of liability, we post no running signs in county parks. Over fears that our children may encounter a sociopath, we encourage sedentary, antisocial behavior by allowing our kids to spend hours in front of an electronic screen. And over fears of nature itself, we quarantine kids under virtual house arrest, thereby ensuring that they too will fear the very thing that they need the most. For tens of thousands of years, kids went outside and played in nature, and we are reversing that in a matter of decades. The area beyond which children are free to roam has shrunk by 89% in just the last 20 years. It doesn't add up. We need a children's Bill of Rights that is explicit about the freedom to explore and improvise, about the right to experience nature in a meaningful way. If the world of our future, with all its complexity, will demand people who are able to understand and adapt, who have creativity and compassion, can we afford anything less? In our own Declaration of Independence, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with all that we know about the benefits of nature, of forests, to children's health, cognitive ability, and socialization. Shouldn't access to nature be an unalienable right? In my career, I've had the privilege of visiting with farmers, ranchers, forest landowners, hunters, fishers, and people who just like to walk in the woods. And I have listened to citizens in small towns and big cities, in red states and in blue. And while we have many differences, we share one thing in common in this country: a love for the land. The rancher on the Rocky Mountain front who wants to pass on the family operation to his children. The woodlot owner in Georgia who has nurtured her forest for a generation in order to send her daughter to college. The grandfather on the Chesapeake Bay who wants to take his daughter duck hunting for the first time, and the urban teacher in Los Angeles who, desperate for some respite from the stress of the city, just wants to take her class to a park down the street. These are the lands that have shaped us as a people and defined us as a country. They provide us with clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and support millions of jobs. They teach us who we are by preserving where we have been. They are not some kind of amenity, something that is nice to have. They are a necessity, something that we must have. They are infrastructure, and we should invest in them accordingly. 150 years ago, President Lincoln transformed this country by beginning a transcontinental railroad during a time of war. And in 1944, FDR's GI Bill allowed millions of Americans to attend college and become the source of our technological and intellectual power. And in 1956, President Eisenhower launched the interstate highway system, creating millions of jobs in a suburban economy that is still basic to the United States. These people understood infrastructure. They understood investing in infrastructure. And we need this kind of leadership now. Whether it is the National Infrastructure Bank proposed in the Senate or President Obama's proposal to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, it is time for our elected leaders to recognize that great nations invest for the future, that our forests and ranches Civil War battlefields and urban parks, and yes, our children, all are appropriate and necessary recipients of public funds. This is what every member of the environmental movement should be focused on. The activist community continues to fight while together we lose more than 1 million acres of forests and millions of young people to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and depression. We may be winning some battles, but folks, we are losing the war, and we need to turn the tide. In today's highly polarized environment, when it seems there is no room for compromise, getting agreement may seem out of reach. But I suggest to you that is what leadership is all about. Christopher Reeve, the actor who had on the wall of his room when he was in rehab a picture of the space shuttle blasting off. And it was autographed by every astronaut who was then at NASA. On top of the picture it said, "We found nothing is impossible." And Reeve said, that should be our motto. Not a Democratic motto, not a Republican motto, but an American motto. Because it's not something one party can do alone, it's something we as a nation must do together. So many of our dreams first seem impossible, he said. Then they seem improbable. And then when we summon the will, they soon become inevitable. I say to you, vast landscapes of working forests, certified working forests, sustainable forests, and vibrant communities that are connected to them. It is time we began to speak of these things as if they are not only possible, but inevitable. This is an all-hands-on-deck proposition, and it is time for us to work together. This is a vision for a great nation, and I urge you to join me in it. You have a wonderful program here for the next 2 days. I'm eager to hear more about the next session on procurement. But mostly, Hans, I want to thank you, Monica, Garvey, for inviting me to be here today. It has been a real privilege, and I look forward to working with each of you in the months and years ahead. Thank you very much.